So I think, yes, welcome everyone to this session on sealing the deal Tamperproof Microcredentials with the EDC platform. We'll jump right into it with our first speaker of the day, of the afternoon. Sorry, my name is Kamakshi Rajagopal. I'm program manager at EADTU, and I will just be moderating the session. And so our first speaker of the afternoon is Diogo Casanova, who's vice-rector for innovation and quality at the Universidade Aberta. Diogo, could I invite you to take us through microcredentials and the MCE project, please?
Thank you, Kamakshi. Hello, everyone. As promised, I will just do a very quick introduction to microcredentials and to the MC project, which myself, the Universidade Aberta, and the EADTU are also members. And hopefully this will give you some background to the main challenges we have in this area of microcredentials, but also give you an overview of the MC project and what we are doing as part of this project. So, of course, majority of you will probably already know this, but what is a microcredential and how this came about in terms of the European landscape in the past few years? For a lot of us, we have been working with microcredentials for a long time, so it's not a new concept, especially in distance learning universities like the Universidade Aberta is one of it. We have been working with short learning programs, with adult learners, and with microcredentials, but this came about in a very explicit way from a Council of the European Union recommendation in 2022. And they identify microcredentials as an opportunity to boost lifelong learning and to increase lifelong learning in all European countries. So for them, the microcredential means the record of a learning outcome that the learner has acquired following a small volume of learning. And that is, in the end, leads to an acquisition of a learning outcome that will have to be assessed against transparent and clearly defined criteria. It's also a learning experience that leads to a microcredential designed to provide the learner with the specific knowledge, skill, and competency that respond to societal, personal, cultural, labor market needs. So it's the development of a credential that is very targeted to the development of a skill and can ensure that the student did acquire that skill or upskill themselves as doing this microcredential. There is an issue which will be relevant for today, which is the microcredential are owned by learners and can be shared and are portable. So can be shared to employers, can be shared to other institutions, but are portable in the sense that the student can bring the microcredential with him to other institutions. And microcredentials can be a standalone credential, a certificate, or combined into larger credentials. So they might be stackable into a larger credential. Microball, a big project that was instrumental in terms of development of what microcredentials are at the European level, and this was previous to the recommendation, stated that microcredential is a certified small volume of learning that can be earned before, during, or after a degree program and has a new way to certify competences acquired early in life. And I think that's important because he also links microcredential with accreditation of prior learning, which is, again, an area that a lot of us have been working on, but microcredential gives some form of meaning to this process. So it's something that we should be looking at, although you will see at an EU level, this has not been yet so explored by higher education institutions. And I should say that I'm looking at this area of microcredentials with the hat of working in a higher education institution and having a senior responsibility in a higher education institution. If you want to dwell a bit more on this EU recommendation, I would advise you to go. It's a relatively long document, but it's an easy document to read. What it gives you is a framework regarding microcredentials in terms of the expected standards and criteria, both for institutions and for national governments to be developing microcredentials. But what he also says is that the Commission and the Council recommend by December 2023, so last December, that state members, partner members have to develop, formulate policies that facilitate the effective design, issuing, and utilization of microcredentials. So they should be looking at how they develop their own national frameworks based on the EU recommendations. And I can tell you that from the MC project that we are working on, but also from a recent ENCA report on microcredentials that was published just a few months ago, what we came to know is that a majority of EU national countries have not designed this policy, nor they develop mechanisms to promote the development of microcredentials and/or the recognition of microcredentials. And one of the objectives of this recommendation was to try to open up the access for higher education institutions and vocational educational training institutions to, for example, employers and to the business sector and service sector to be able to co-develop and co-collaborate on the development of upskilling programs that would lead to microcredentials. And for that, there needs to be some form of framework that helps this to be able to be delivered. What we know from the Council recommendation until now, the Council recommendation says that microcredential issuers should be trusted providers. That's the terminology that they use. And that the EU opens microcredentials to vocational educational training, industries, or the service sector. But we don't have yet at the national level mechanisms to ensure who are the trusted providers. And that's becoming an issue in our view. Portability is another one, and we will be talking in the afternoon about this. But besides the EU mechanisms, and hopefully today there will be sharing some light into this, Europass, ECTS, European Framework for Qualifications, there is no direction of travel at national level or at an EU level. So that's something we need to have as a joint approach for microcredentials at the national level, but also at the EU level. Who stores these microcredentials? How are students being able to export them, be able to bring them with them, and to be able to reuse them to certificate what they have learned as part of a learning experience? This has a lot still to be developed at this part of the topic. Member states should be able to apply and adapt existing quality assurance mechanisms wherever possible. The ENCA report from 2023, as I mentioned before, what it says basically is that, with the exception of 2 or 3 countries, the vast majority of European countries in the Bologna higher education area is not yet integrating into their own quality assurance mechanisms the area of microcredentials. And again, this might be a problem because the standards are not consistent across the board, both within each country, but also at the European level. There are some recommendations, and even today in the morning when we were having an EADTU conference, the quality assurance agency, the ENCA was addressing this issue, that even in terms of ECTS and in terms of learning outcomes, which were a recommendation by this council recommendation that every institution would use and every national country would try to implement. But even in terms of ECTS and learning outcomes, not all microcredentials are responding to this. Again, this becomes significantly complicated to be able to recognize learning outcomes, to be able to recognize the microcredentials across higher education institutions and across national countries. So it is an element that is a requirement. It should be a requirement as part of the credential, but not all institutions are implementing this. We know also that there is the recommendation for institutions to involve students and employers in the design and/or needs analysis of the microcredentials. There is the possibility of stackability within and outside higher education, and there is no clear guidance of workload. So we know from the recommendation that the guidance that exists is between 1 and 30 ECTS, which you can understand it's a very vague reference currency of workload. Microball, the project that I mentioned before, recommends between 4 and 6. The MC approach that we've been looking at, the overall approach is between 1 ECTS and 6 ECTS. This, again, it should be short courses offered for upskilling and reskilling of adult learners, so people that are already on the job or need to reskill themselves to find other jobs. So it needs to be something that is applicable and be able to manage expectations of future learners. The MC project has these objectives very quickly: develop and operationalizing the concept of microcredentials in European universities, taking into account students' perspectives. So we've done some questionnaires to students pre and after doing their microcredential courses in these 10 institutions that are part of the project, supporting institutional development for organizing and creating the conditions for developing transformative modular education and microcredentials. So new policy, new structural support has been created in these 10 institutions, and delivering evidence-based research and evidence to support dialogue with policymakers at the national and EU level. So what we know from the findings that we've been developing at MCE, as I mentioned before, very little policy and guidance for microcredentials development at the national level. So there are some EU funding stream available. Portugal is a very good example of that. There's also in Spain, in the Netherlands. But overall, there is a lack of guidance and frameworks at the national level. Quality assurance approaches are scarce. Only Spain, from those 9 countries that are part of this project, 10 partners, 9 countries, only Spain had a clear policy on microcredentials from within these countries. Institutions are developing strategies for microcredential, some with bespoke programs, courses, working directly with stakeholders in developing these courses. Others, more pragmatic approaches by unbundling existing provisions. So taking, for example, a master's and identifying units within the master's that can be offered as a microcredential that can then be stackable, and students can enroll in that specific unit and then build up towards the master certification. Recognition of prior learning, as I mentioned before, has been a less developed area, at least in these 10 institutions. There is a big dependency on funding. So we often see microcredentials more as an exploratory rather than a future-proof concept. The absence of national strategy impacts on the recognition from employers and from students, which of course then impacts on the business model. So it's difficult to convince senior management team within institutions to invest significantly in microcredentials where there isn't, in retrospect, a guarantee of some funding stream coming back to the institution. And there is an element here about the cost of a microcredential development and the funding and the tuition of the student or the employer when they pay the microcredential. Students value much the flexibility of obtaining a microcredential in contrast with larger and more traditional programs. That's some findings that we found already from MC. Just to finalize my presentation, and some reflections on the MC project, and I'm very happy to share more information if you are interested in a later stage. But since national policies are still absent and the EU recommendations are very open, the framework is very open, quality assurance agencies are not yet being involved in the accreditation process of microcredentials in the majority of the countries, and there is no national endeavor to develop tools to support and provide clarity about microcredentials. So repositories, portability mechanisms, national guidelines for the development, new policy or frameworks for engagement with employers. And one of the issues we are having is exactly that, is that employers are still yet to understand the relevance of a microcredential for their employees. And that has to be worked not just with higher education institutions, but also with governments and with policymakers to try to convince employers that a microcredential is a good certificate for their employees to be able to attend. Concerns that we may have if and when funding stops, so when these funding streams from the European Union stop to exist, we may have different tier quality. So from higher education to higher education institution, from an higher education institution to a big tech provider, for example, or from a higher education institution to a VET service provider. And I think that's something to reflect on because we need to have quality assurance that is consistent across the board. The cost attractiveness will depend on the value for money. So students or employers have to understand the value and the relevance of the microcredential. And only by understanding this attractiveness, they will do they will pay the tuition to attend a microcredential or to be certificated by a microcredential. There is still the lack of business models that may lead to less. The lack of business models may lead to less attractive approaches. And the connection with employers may be difficult to achieve especially in higher education. So you need to understand that universities are very traditional. I'm thinking now about education institutions like universities. We are very traditional, and the academic staff are very worried about opening up their own modules and working with employers to develop specific courses that are less research oriented, but more professionally focused oriented. And so there needs to be some attractiveness in terms of funding for institutions to invest on this area. So there is all these business model has still to be worked at by institutions and also by national countries. Because also there will be a competition with big players. So technology companies like Google or Apple that are developing already, Facebook, Meta, they're already developing their own micro-credentials, and other heavily funded sectors like vocational educational training that may lead to higher education institutions when funding stops within these EU-funded projects, they may want to give up their micro-credential projects and come back to more traditional offers. So there needs to be some reflection on the business model, some reflection on the sustainability, and some reflection on the value for money. And I stop with that.
Thank you, Diogo. Now, I know that, Diogo, you will move on to another meeting. So I will just ask the audience if you have any questions. Just we have time for one, I think, very quickly. And you can just put it in the chat. But if there are none, then we just move on to the next speaker of this afternoon. Thank you, Diogo. Who is Koen Nomden, the team leader for transparency and recognition of skills and qualifications at DG Employment of the European Commission. Koen, I invite you to take the floor with your presentation on transparency, recognition, and the role of eSealing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kamakshi. So I'm very happy to that I was invited this afternoon. So thanks for that. And I am actually now presenting on transparency, recognition, and the role of eSealing a bit more at the policy level. And then afterwards, I will be colleague of mine, of our technical support team, Ildiko Mazar, will present more the technical details on eSealing. So, and I think that the latter is the more important thing also of this afternoon. So I will really try to keep it short. I would like to thank the first speaker for the interesting presentation. It was very, very interesting for me and also for the European Commission, you know, to get this feedback on how the field looks like based on a concrete project. And one takeaway is that students very much value micro-credentials. That is what I took, but that academic institutions, but also employers are not yet entirely, let's say, on that on the same pathway of thinking. And this made me think also that skills-based approaches are, you know, on the rise. But then if you talk to employers, they still want to have, of course, the certainty of qualifications. But I would also think that all the work we do and that everybody does on micro-credentials should also mean that micro-credentials should be trusted, of course, in particular if they are well quality assured. Now, this as a very short intro, let's now move to, because the topic of this afternoon is very much also the role of eSealing in order to enhance transparency, in order to enhance the recognition of micro-credentials. And indeed, in the skills agenda unit at DG EMPL, and in particular in the team for which I'm responsible, we are in charge of the European Digital Credentials for Learning platform. And not only that, we are also at the same time in charge of the European learning model. And the aim actually of this platform and also the learning model is to achieve interoperability, is to achieve that micro-credentials are indeed in terms of metadata structured in the same way, so that they are indeed understood in different countries, so that students or also workers can take them with them if they move to another country, whether for the purpose of further studies or for the purpose of work. Now, this slide actually reflects the fact that this credentials platform and the European learning model, of course, do not stand on itself. Of course, there is a close connection with the Microcredentials Council recommendation, so the EU level recommendation, which is true, is fairly general on microcredentials, which has aimed at agreeing on a definition, but I think it's still not the case that everybody talks about the same thing when they talk about microcredentials, but also, and it's very much related not only to that microcredentials recommendation, but also more broadly to the EU policy framework around skills, around qualifications. And there we talk about the skills agenda, we talk about the European qualifications framework, but also at the top, we talk about our social compass. And when we talk about the world of work, the European pillar of social rights gives direction, and also more recently, the action plan on labor market shortages, skill shortages that the EU is confronted with, was adopted in March, but also together with a review of the European pillar of social rights. And of course, on the right side, we see a bit more concrete tools like the Europass decision, where the platform is very much related to the individual learning accounts recommendation, which is implemented currently in countries, but also the ESCO classification, the digital education action plans. Okay, let's now move on to microcredentials themselves, how to see microcredentials in this broader landscape. And actually, microcredentials can be seen in the same way in this broader landscape as the European Digital Credentials for Learning platform. So microcredentials, at least in particular, I would say from a DG employment and skills agenda perspective, is really a core element in skills development policy. And microcredentials do have, despite the reflections before, the Commission believes that the microcredentials do have a high potential, in particular for up and reskilling, where this is short term, because people at work do not have time to go on long-term training. And also, we do believe that a European approach to microcredentials is very much supporting, at least in potential, portability, transparency across Europe, and also, hopefully, recognition. Now, if we look at a bit more broadly at skills development in the EU, we see the keywords are lifelong upskilling, lifelong reskilling, also simply lifelong learning. And when we look at the European skills agenda, it's there for enhancing sustainable competitiveness of the European economy. This was formulated in 2020, but it's still very relevant, but also social fairness and resilience. And we see at the bottom of the slide, the European Year of Skills, which actually is just finishing today. So today is the last day of the European Year of Skills. But I think thanks to the European Year of Skills, skills has been on top of many agendas. Skills is not any longer the exclusive business, let's say, of education and training, or the exclusive business of the world of work. We see nowadays in all sectors of the economy that skills is key for competitiveness. And I'm sure that we will also see percolating there the microcredentials issue. Now, in this context of sustainable competitiveness, we do need to see the EU targets related to skills. And just to mention the target on adults, 60% of the adult population should participate in training every year. And of course, in this context, microcredentials will play a key role. It's not possible to achieve that target without microcredentials. Then we have the basic digital skills target of 80% that are needed. And also there, microcredentials can play a big role. And then we also do have the 20 million ICT specialists, where in the basic training, I would say, okay, it's a bit less microcredentials, but then on top of basic training, ICT engineers need to update because things go very fast. Also there, we would see potential for micro credentials. But we do have indeed this current context of micro-credentials that we saw a bit in the first presentation, namely that too few learners are engaged in learning, and that skills needs are continuously changing. And then we also see that many employers do provide training to employees, and the individual learning accounts recommendations is supporting this, but only few, less than 1/3, provides also certification. And so the transparency in that case of training, yeah, is suffering a bit if it doesn't lead to certification. And then micro-credentials are actively used if we look at the labor market in some sectors, but employers, and that's also said in the first presentation, are not always so aware and do not always have so much experience with micro-credentials. So there is a lot of work there to go on, and uptake by workers is also limited, also due to uncertainty about recognition of micro-credentials. Now, the European approach recommendation is, of course, fairly general. It cannot intervene directly to what member states are doing. So education and training policies, as you all know, is a responsibility of each and every member state. It's a sensitive issue of subsidiarity. The Commission also is sensitive here, I think, because if the Commission is too proactive sometimes in proposing something, it knows that it doesn't get the thing. And that's the explanation why the micro-credentials recommendation is as it is, namely a fairly general one aiming at common definition, but also some common elements, and also some issuing principles. Now, I think we can skip this one. I think this is clear for everybody, but I wanted to draw to this one because this is also the bridge to the next topic of the eSealing. So the principles for design and issuing of microcredentials are also part of the Council recommendation. And these principles refer to key topics on microcredentials like quality, relevance, also learning pathways, authenticity, information and guidance, and today we talk mainly about portability. So it's one of the principles for design. We talk about transparency, we talk about recognition, it's all there. And we do also talk about authenticity. And when we look at, and now I'm taking the bridge to the European digital credentials as supported by the European learning model as semantic standards in the field of learning, we see that some of these, actually nearly all of these principles for design and for issuing microcredentials are coming back in this overview, which summarizes success factors for the European learning model and also for the digital credentials for learning. And these success factors are, first of all, that these two tools try to be universal, aim to be universal, flexible, extendable, and also to be comprehensive in terms of coverage, for example, of what is captured in the learning model in terms of metadata. Then, very important, verifiability. So the digital credentials for learning allow for a format and validity check. They will carry out an authenticity check, very important in terms of, because we want to have trusted institutions that issue microcredentials, but employers should also be able to check the authenticity of institutions, and the same, of course, for credential evaluators. Then also standardization, really a key factor there, related very strongly to interoperability. We want to have, of course, the same standards across European countries to facilitate portability, to facilitate recognition. And that's why there is one semantic model through ELM to describe accreditation, courses, and credentials, but also very much linked to other frameworks and also with the help of controlled vocabularies. And the last word here is portability. And there also the legal admissibility is addressed through the eSealed support that is provided by the European Digital Credentials for Learning. And one last word here, and then Ildiko will show in the next presentation, the learning model and also the credential platform are multilingual. So it's available in 29 languages. And the relevance there is both for education and employment. And I think here also the micro-credential comes together, because the micro-credential is also relevant in both an educational and an employment-related context. So this, as far as what I wanted to share this afternoon with you, and I'm now passing the floor back.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ildiko. You can.
I'll just seamlessly move into the next presentation, if you don't mind. Hello, everybody. I'm Ildiko Mazar. As Koen kindly already introduced me, I am one of the members of the ELM and EDC, the European Digital Credentials for Learning support team. So if you will have any questions after our joint presentation, you will be able to reach out and ask questions. But without further ado, what I would like to touch on in my part of the presentation is to tease out a little bit what we mean by trust in general, and how we can break it down to trust in various issues or various aspects of credentials. So first of all, we had the policy overview before, and we did hear the presentation of Diogo as well before about the importance of portable, transparent, recognizable credentials. When it comes to trust, we have two areas of policy that we need to talk about, one about the content and one about the so-called envelope, which is the credential that is getting sealed and sent to individuals. So by content, we mean the description of learning outcomes, the related skills of a person through their learning achievements, the description of activities, and all of this can only be transparent and recognizable if we are applying a standard, a European standard in our case, although our standard is based on a global standard, that is the W3C's verifiable credential data model. And once we are applying this data model to the description of the content, this is where all credential can become portable and exchangeable and stackable, irrespective of their size, shape, or origin. So whether it is a micro-credential issued by an employer for the job experience of a person, whether it's volunteering or informal, non-formal, or formal learning, the European learning model does not distinguish between the types of learning. Quite the opposite. With its 50 classes and nearly 500 properties, the European learning model allows the description of any kind of learning, and this is the key to making them interoperable, compatible, stackable, and comparable. When it comes to the envelope, this is the area of identity of issuing organizations, as well as the persons receiving and owning the credentials, authentication, and secure delivery policies. So back for a second for the content, just like Diogo, I'm not going to elaborate on terminology much, but it's important to know what we mean by European digital credentials. European Digital Credentials for Learning, or short EDCs, are claims or groups of claims related to the learning achievements of a person. This can describe transcripts of records, degrees, micro-credentials, and anything in between. And these credentials create links between the individual credential holder, the awarding body of the claims, and the learning that is described in the credential. These EDCs also consist of structured data, dereferenceable data most of the time, and this is structured in accordance with the European learning model, which, as Koen already mentioned on his last slide, refers to other well-known frameworks and controlled vocabularies. This allows us to reference for example, European or national qualification framework levels when it comes to the level of education. We are using control vocabularies to describe the field of education. For this, we use UNESCO's field of education taxonomy. We use the ESCO taxonomy to describe knowledge, skill, and competence concepts, but also the ESCO pillar that is specifically dedicated to occupations. This allows the connection of required skills for certain occupations. I could go on and on, but this presentation is not about the data model. So just to move on, it's very important to mention, and this is what the focus of the presentation is, that these credentials are tamper evident, which means that if anybody tampers with the content, the tampering is immediately and very much visible, and that these credentials comply with international standards. And final word on the envelope aspect of trust are key to the verification of the issuing organization as come through the EIDAS regulation. You cannot issue a European digital credential for learning without applying a digital seal on it. An eSeal, which is an advanced or qualified electronic seal, is basically the digital equivalent of the organization's rubber stamp. And when Diogo mentioned this, the trusted providers, this is the one way of making sure that the issuing organization can be trusted. By applying their EIDAS compliant electronic seal, they take legal responsibility for the origin, authenticity, and integrity of the credential they issued. So there's not much incentive for cheating. Let's just put it that way. Something that is, I really just want to highlight as I segue into describing an actual micro-credential that is compliant with the Council recommendations Annex 1 requirements. As you probably know, and when you receive our slides after the event, you will be able to click on this image that will take you to the webpage where you can further explore the Council recommendation, more specifically the Annex 1. There are mandatory elements and optional elements to be included in these micro-credentials, and ELM has the answer to all these properties, so you are able to describe a credential using ELM classes and properties to describe these aspects. But the devil is always in the details. So Diogo also mentioned already how difficult it is to describe certain aspects of these mandatory fields. For example, not to go further than the workload, for example. The workload can be expressed in ECTS credit points when we're talking about higher education or micro-credentials issued by higher education institutions, but it may not be applicable to some other non-formally achieved learning outcomes. This is where the European learning model supplies instruments to describe workload, both in terms of ECTS credit points, if it's applicable, or in fact, by using and referring to any credit point system, not just ECTS, and or by stating the workload in terms of hours. That is usually quite universal to describe the duration of learning or the volume of learning in hours is always easier. And very much the same applies to level. When we talk about higher education and qualifications, obviously, the European and national qualification levels, framework levels, are very well defined to describe and understand the level of education or the learning, but this may not be applicable to every learning, particularly when we come to the size of micro-credentials. I'm sure that you all know through your experiences with other projects how difficult it is to put your finger on the EQF or NQF level of a smaller chunk of learning when it's taken out of context. So once again, the European learning model provides the mechanism to describe this level, not exclusively by the provision of values for EQF and or NQF level, but also by other measures. And once you have these little puzzle pieces in place, this is a very core key to transparency and portability. Once everybody is using the same vocabulary to express the various aspects of learning, everybody else, including, as Koen mentioned before, prospective employers or admission officers for further studies, they will be able to decipher the credential data manually or by learning by machines, and be able to process and understand the quality of these credentials. Now to the fun part. How do we make sure that these so-called electronic seals are applied properly? How can people issue credentials that are definitely tamper evident and they show who issued them? We have a tool that we call the Online Credential Builder on the EDC infrastructure. With just having an EU login ID, you can register your own account and create credential templates. And these credential templates are just there to populate with personal data, names and grades, and issue them to a person. A template in itself does not contain sensitive information, but as soon as you issue a credential template to one or multiple credential recipients, you will be required, as I mentioned before, to apply your rubber stamp. And here you will just have to accept that data coming from your electronic seal will be baked into the issued credential, and this cannot be tampered with. So if it is my test organization issuing this credential, I cannot disguise myself as another organization. The sign-by information will be populated with the information that is contained in this electronic seal that I mentioned before, that is EIDAS compliant. So you will see the organization's name, who owns this seal, their alternative name, if you like, the country of their registration, and their legal identifier, which is usually an EIDAS identifier or a VAT number. Then, what we mean by tamper evidence. So on one hand, you cannot cheat with the seal. You cannot change the identity of the issuing organization, because as soon as that happens, you break the seal. But also, if you would like to change some smaller aspects of the credential, let's say it's very important for you to prove that you really have acquired and proven certain learning outcomes, but you completed an online course and the assessment was not really supervised, and nobody checked your identity, so it's a less reliable credential. Maybe you would like to change that and say that you have actually sat through an exam that was supervised and they checked your ID, which would make you make the credential more credible, and the prospective employer would can guarantee that you actually own these skills. If you change even just this tiny little aspect of the content of the data, when you look at the credential once again, the seal will automatically be shown as broken and the verification will fail. So it's really difficult to tamper with these credentials. And this is why we use tamper evident. Tampering you can do, but you will be found out if you try to change. Just one word before I move on to a little demonstration is I don't have time to talk about how to actually build an Annex 1 compliant micro-credential, but we have a short audiovisual training material that we are going to publish soon. If you're interested in that, please get in touch. We also are working on a more detailed mapping document between ELM and Annex 1 of the Council recommendation. And if you have any further questions, our support team is available for you to contact. So this is the email address. I'm sure we will be able to give it to you after the event as well. And now, just to show you how this actually works in practice. So I mentioned already that we have the European Digital Credentials for Learning infrastructure. This portal consists of two parts. One designated to credential issuers. This is where you can create your online credential builder account and build your credentials. And there's one part, which is the credentials for citizens part, where credential holders who receive their credentials, let's say by email, can download the attached credential from the automatic notification, and upload the credential here and visualize it in case they don't want to store their credentials in a wallet. For the credential issuers, like I said, and I'm not going to go into details, but you are able to create this personalized account where you can store your credential templates. As you can see, I have quite a lot, but just to demonstrate how you can issue Annex 1 compliant micro-credential, you will be able to supply the credential recipients certain data. This does not necessarily have to be just the name and delivery address. You can customize further personal information about the recipient. This is just the mandatory. And other than that, you can specify date of birth, place of birth, ID number, whatever. So if I try to issue this credential to myself, and give myself a nice pass grade and issue the credential, and you can of course issue not just one, multiple credentials as well, but this is just a test. So you will be able to see how these credentials look like. Since I built this credential before, you will already see the fruits of my work, which will be the micro-credential issued to Anna Andromeda. So far, you cannot see information about the signing party because it hasn't been sealed yet. But if this credential and the claims contained in the credential were awarded by a different organization, that's the information that you can specify in the template. This is important because it isn't always the same organization who is the awarding body and the one who seals the credential. For university alliances, for projects, you might have one entity. Let's say the EMC project is the awarding body collectively, but there will be only one organization signing the credential. You can distinguish between these two. Or if you are stacking credentials and you say that two parts of the macro credential was awarded by two different organizations, this is how you can do that as well. And if you recall from the presentation slides, if you want to see how the credential was assessed, for example, you can just very intuitively skip around the credential content and see information about the assessment type, mode of assessment, reliability, the grading scheme that is used, what activity contributed to the acquisition of these learning outcomes, what the actual learning outcomes are. And here is where you can reference related ESCO skills and skills from other controlled vocabularies, frameworks, and taxonomies. Here's the achievement information with the volume of learning, in this case, both in terms of hours and in terms of ECTS credit points, but we also have EQF and NQF level, etc., etc. So if I am happy with the look and feel of this credential, I can proceed to sealing the credential. So I just take my test seal that I already prepared for this demonstration. I will be asked if I'm happy with sealing the credentials with this seal containing this information. And as you will see, once this credential is sealed, then once I preview the credential again, I will be able to see that additional piece of information here. And now you see that the information from the electronic seal got incorporated into the credential. So when I send this credential, the learner or the recipient of this credential, Anna Andromeda, will receive the credential that will have this information included as well. And once I send this credential as the issuer, then the recipient of the credential will receive automatic notifications by email. And it's usually very fast, but I already prepared a previous issue to show you the two different ways of issuing credentials. One, like I mentioned, if it's sent to just an email address, then the credential will be attached as a JSON file. The learner can download this file and then upload it into the viewer. There's instructions here who sent the credential and where the person can visualize it. If this credential, however, was directly issued to my Europass or other credential wallet, I will get a direct link to the credential that is already deposited into my wallet. I don't have to do anything at all. I can just go there and it's going to be there waiting for me. It's like a money transfer. I don't need to be aware of somebody sending me money. As long as they know my IBAN number, they can send me money. So when we go back to our viewer, so let's say that we upload the credential that we just received, and we can see what it looks like. This is me who only received this credential by email. I am able to upload the credential and see the instant and automatic verification checks and authentication checks. Everything is fine. If, however, like I said, I tamper with this credential and I want to upload the tampered version of the credential, after a little bit of time, because it's always instant and automatic, I will get this seal broken and the verification failed because I changed what was in that credential before the assessment reliability from unsupervised to supervised. And this is what I wanted to run through for you, just to give you an overview of how this actually looks like in practice. And we would really like to leave some space for questions and answers, or if you would like us to, or me to, delve into something more deeper, or slow down a little bit and show some aspects of the credential or the tamper evidence or applying seals, then I think we have time for questions. So yes. Thank you very much for your attention so far, and we're here with Koen for questions.
Thank you. Yes, we are just shift in the agenda a little bit because I think it's useful to have questions on this immediately. So please feel free to take the floor if you have any questions for Koen or Ildiko.
I have a question. João Gomes from the MOOC Portuguese platform. What is the, actually I have two questions. What is the stage of this eSeal regarding to be recognized as a standard, and what's the acceptance? And second, if you have any MOOC platform already using these European digital credentials for their courses.
I'm happy to take this, Koen. Always feel free to interrupt me when you wish. So because these eSeals are eIDAS compliant, which is a European regulation itself, these must be accepted. It's actually, the legislation says that it cannot be denied legal effect just on the basis of it being digital. So that is absolutely granted. With regards to MOOC platforms, we do know and we do have implementers who are issuing credentials for their MOOCs, but they are the MOOC authors, if you like, the MOOC providers, not the platforms. By the MOOC platforms, I presume that you mean ELM or the learning management system providers like Moodle or edX, who would allow you to have everything in the same ecosystem. We do not know of learning management system providers who are incorporating our code, but it is possible. So we always encourage education and training providers to approach their vendors and encourage them to get in touch, because the source code is open and freely available. We have a key-ready Docker image that implementers can just download and install to get an equivalent looking issuer infrastructure structure on their own servers. Sorry. So it is very much possible, and we do have the support as well to help people install their own systems. And we do have not LMS providers, but universities, for example, who are following this path. We usually recommend that if you are issuing smaller batches of credentials, you're welcome to use the Commission's tools and services. As soon as you exceed the volume of hundreds or thousands of credentials per issue, it's safer probably and more desirable to have the infrastructure within house and on your own servers.
Yeah, but I wanted to add, perhaps just to be clear on this, so the platform, European Digital Credentials, is fully commission owned. So that means that it had to go through also a data protection assessment. And of course, as it is commission owned, it complies fully with any institutional commission requirements, which also do exist, of course. And this is the reason why it uses eSealed, because the qualified or advanced eSealeds are European level recognized eSealeds through the EIDAS regulation. So I just wanted to add that to what you just said, Ildiko.
Yes, Anastasia, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. And Koen and Ildiko, whom I know very well, greetings to you. And thank you for the presentation. That's very interesting for us also to see from CEDEFOP side, all the developments related to digital credentials, because we also have been doing a lot of research on the topic, mainly for micro-credentials for VET, for vocational education and training, and labor market learning. So this is very interesting. I just wanted to ask Ildiko, if I may, because I was listening attentively to your presentation, the part on the learning outcomes, of course, because I have a keen interest on the topic. I took a screenshot of that photo where you showed us, for example, a situation where learning outcomes are presented in terms of how a digital content is developed, for instance, and other skills. So I wanted to ask also, because as Koen mentioned before, it's a commissions platform, and I guess the links with ESCO and other EU tools is obvious, and this is fine. But always looking at more closely at the way learning outcome statements are, being described. And I just wanted some clarifications from your part in that sense, because I see it as a headline, but then when I see what it entails, a bit, interesting what exactly it refers to, and in what sense the statements, the learning outcome statements, are there.
Thank you very much for the question, Anastasia. I'm more than happy to elaborate on this. Like I said, the devil is always in the detail, and this is something that we are very proud to show off. So when you are building a digital credential, you start with building your overall phase, or the starting point. Your credential has to have a title, it has to have a valid from date, it has to have a type which is generic or accredited. And then when you start elaborating on the details is when you're beginning to include claims. I mentioned on one of the early slides, digital credential contains one claim or a group of claims of an individual. And because we are servicing different education and training and learning providers, it is very important that we serve the needs of all these stakeholders. So we are not having tunnel vision for just higher education or for vocational education or non-formal education or learning, but everything. This is why there could be a difference between an achievement claim that is always linked to specific learning outcomes and subsequently potentially related skills, or if it's just a claim about activity. Just sitting through a course does not guarantee the acquisition of learning outcomes. So the correct claim to make about a participation credential, for example, is an activity claim. XYZ participated at this workshop or hackathon or course, whatever. Maybe the credential only contains entitlements. Because you have a bachelor's degree, now you are entitled to enroll in master's studies, or if you have the master's postgraduate, or you are now able to practice first aid, or you are able to join the medical chamber or law bar or something like that kind of entitlements. And assessments, best example, transcript of records, when there's no mention of achievements of learning outcomes, simply grades and assessments in a list. Achievements are super special because a learning achievement can be linked to all of these. So a learning achievement can not only contain references to specific learning outcomes, and I'll slow down here, I know I'm often fast. So this means that you can describe the learning outcome as broadly or as much in detail as you like. Many of our implementers can't make much use of the learning outcomes because they are not capable of putting the efforts into tagging all their learning outcomes with skills, for example. For them, there's an achievement description and a field that we call summary of learning outcomes. If this is enough for the credential provider, they can just provide a very brief text of the summary of the learning outcomes, but this is not the same level of machine readability and skill comparison as very many would like. Where it gets really important is how you describe the learning outcomes. But before I move there, I also wanted to say that a learning outcome, a learning achievement, as is specified by Annex 1 of the Council recommendation of microcredentials, must be based on assessment. So an achievement is usually linked to assessment claims, but it can also link to activities. What class or course the person had to take, or what was the activity that influenced this achievement that is linked to the learning outcomes, and what assessment was used, and was there any rights earned at the end of the learning activity and the whole learning experience. This is where it gets super complicated, and I know that this meeting is not about this, but it's very important to understand how to use and customize the use of European digital credentials to express the exact types of claims with the exact level of detail that you and the credential recipient would need to plan their career and learning paths. And now to your question about how we describe learning outcomes, if you want to specify concrete learning outcomes, one to many, you are able to give the learning outcome a snappy little title, select what type of skill it is. Is it knowledge or skill? This is coming from the ESCO taxonomy, so competence is part of skill, attitude as well, so don't ask. Reusability level might also be important, whether it's a transversal skill or sector specific or occupation specific or not applicable. And then this is where you are able to use the latest version of the ESCO skill taxonomy to specify the skills that you would like to attach to your credential. So you can just start typing and your search is narrowing down. And once you find this particular ESCO skill that you would like to tag, then you just add this. I don't know what else is there in terms of digital content, but let's say we add another one. If you would like to use a different taxonomy, which is very likely, you might want to use particularly a taxonomy for digital skills. This is actually two references from the DigComp 2.1 version of the leveled DigComp competencies, but you can also reference here green skills taxonomies or any sector or area relevant taxonomy, as long as it is published in linked open data format. This is important so that the concepts can be found and they are dereferenceable. Once again, if you cannot do this, you can just use the learning outcome summary field of the learning achievement and not go into too much detail. So it's really up to the individual's need to what extent and to what level of detail they describe the learning outcomes. And I'm very thankful again for the question. I hope I didn't give too much time, but I hope it was clear.
No, very clear. Just a comment, and of course I will leave the floor to other participants to ask. For me, this is very interesting indeed, because yeah, in terms of really focusing on the skills and the link with ESCO, this is clear, this is fine. It's just that for me, when we talk about learning outcomes, it's like knowledge, skills, competencies, and in general, the ability of the learner to show what, at the end of the day, what they have learned. And it's interesting also the terms you have been using in terms of achievements or claims, because at the European level, we discuss a lot about intended and achieved learning outcomes. So I would say the achieved learning outcomes aspect is actually linked to what you are presenting. Perhaps, Koen, a proposal to you, the important work you have been doing at the European level about the short description of qualifications based on learning outcomes could somehow be not necessarily linked currently, but there could be some links established within this part on the summary of learning outcomes even. I know it's credentials with so many complexities, workload and everything, but particularly like all the different strands of work we have been doing at the European level somehow to come together. You see what I mean? But and also the final thing, the way also learning outcome statements are really written. We have been doing a lot of work at the European level with 2 handbooks on the topic on how to draft learning outcome statements. Even that could potentially be linked somehow here. I don't know, just for reflection, Koen.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Anastasia. I hope it's okay if I just say a very small word here. Now, thanks for your second point. I actually wanted to come in and say exactly the same thing as you just said. So for the, I'm saying this now for the broader audience, we have been working in a project group with national Europass centers, basically, and also national coordination points of the EQF on developing short descriptions for learning outcomes of qualifications, because we have a lot of guidance on how to draft learning outcomes. We don't have, however, standard vocabularies to do that. And so this short descriptions of learning outcomes will soon actually be published. And as part of the overall material on building credentials, of course, I mean, it's part of that family of materials. But Ildiko also showed that where we do have standard vocabulary, like ESCO, like also DITCOMP as competence framework, we do have it already in the platform itself. And while on learning outcomes, okay, we do have guidance on learning outcomes. This is also because this is an area of autonomy, isn't it? Of the different countries. But of course, especially those short descriptions, I think, do have a lot of potential, because they can really help describe learning outcomes in a short way. Because if you do have a digital credential, it makes no sense to have 2 A4 pages of learning outcomes. You should come really to the core of the learning outcomes. Now, the tool itself, as Ildiko showed, is relatively flexible in the way in which you formulate learning outcomes. But yeah, it's really part of that broader family of tools around qualifications, micro-credentials, and also learning outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Anastasia, and the answers as well. Any more questions? We do have a little bit more time. Okay, maybe we move on then to our short reflection on why as EADTU we are interested in this topic as well. Let me just share my screen. So, yes, so we are looking at eSealing at EADTU as well. And this is made primarily because from our conversations we have with our member universities, we do see that there is an increasing need for some form of system of verification that can travel with individual learners, as you know, our educational systems are becoming more flexible, and we see that learners are also taking advantage of this flexibility. A second kind of reason that we're seeing this is that if you look at online continuous professional development, and certainly the trends on personalization, eSealing seems to be the next step in making this form of lifelong learning actually in practice very tangible. And lastly, we're also considering, as we are a member organization, if this can, somehow play a role in a new service that we could offer our members as well. So just a little bit of insight into how we are planning to work with this in the coming months. So at this point, we're still in, I would say, a testing phase where we're gaining more insight into what are the technical requirements and the processes, not only on the technology side, but also internally with our organizational processes. How do we make this concrete towards our members? What do we work, in batches of eSealing? What are the questions that we need to have in place to do this? But then we really want to move into a kind of piloting phase once this testing phase becomes clearer, to look at can we do this under our CMF work, where we'll work with a number of MOOC platforms, to see if this is looking at a number of these micro-credentials that are already running. Can we look at piloting some of those and piloting eSealing in that context? And then, moving on through these steps, we hope in a number of months or possibly next year to look at, is this a service then that we could offer our members and possibly others as well? And as an issuer of eSeals, and what is the kind of process that we would need to have in place to be able to offer this as a service. So very, very shortly, just some insight into our interest in this and our next steps for this. Let me just so move on. If there are any more questions, please do take the floor. We do have some more time for this.
Another question is there any planned integration with Europass?
Is this a question to Kamakshi or digital credentials?
Yeah, for eSeals, for you or Koen, yes.
Okay. Well, the Europass actually is the first implementer of the code that I mentioned before. So when you are issuing using the EC platform, you actually are able to deposit directly into Europass. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. The Europass library consists of 4 parts at least. There's the CV section, the cover letter section, and then there's the certificates and credentials, where the user also sees their individual wallet ID, which includes their EU login ID with which they register the Europass account. If they give this address to the credential issuer, or if they give the email address with which the account is registered, then the issuing organization can directly deposit the issued credential into Europass. So that's already in production.
Can I raise a question? Sorry, I cannot find the raise hand. So is it okay to ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I'm sitting in the UK, and so curious about the international applicability of what we've heard about today. Just been doing some research on the creation of microcerts in Australia, and they're really gaining great traction. Just reviewed a paper about their application across the different provinces in Canada, and obviously because of Brexit, we are challenged now in terms of our ability to liaise with Europe on this really vital issue. So just wondered whether you have to be a member of the European Union to take advantage of everything, given the comments that have been made previously.
Well, if you don't, do you want to take it, Koen?
No, I was thinking that you would take this question
Okay.
from a technical
So,
perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. So from the point of view of who can seal credentials, that's a political question, and that restricts the issuers to any organization who has a base in the EU. So this is just an EIDS thing that you must be an EU country to get an eSeal. But fret not, we have a function called mandated issue, which means that a third party can seal on your behalf, which means that the third party has to trust you to put their stamp on your credentials. So normally the way it works is we have the awarding body who doesn't have an eSeal because they are either not legally registered or they're not legally registered in the European Union, and they have their mandated counterpart, let's say a membership organization such as EADTU. If you have a trusted agreement, maybe a signed document that you can scan and attach to the credentials as an evidence of the mandate, then EADTU can seal credentials on your behalf. How you agree on this is up to you, but technically speaking, it's possible to issue on anybody's behalf.
Thank you very much. That is really reassuring.
Okay, if there are no more questions, yes, I would like to thank Koen and Ildiko for their presentations, and I suppose, yeah, we will share the presentations as well, but I suppose you're also reachable through the email that you put in the chat a little bit earlier on. And of course, at EADTU as well, we are always reachable if you're interested to learn more about our activities around eSealing. And yeah, I think we would very much like to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.